Hello everyone, Bob here, and welcome to the Voice of the Movies. For this week's episode, we're going to take a look at this album that covers the original Scream and Scream2. And it is the Marco Beltrami score. It isn't the songs that some of the soundtracks released back in the day is just music from and inspired by. This is actual score music from the films. So let's look at the release and I'll give you my thoughts. There's the front cover. I like how the phone is in Ghostface's mouth there. And of course, down there in the background behind the knife is the house where the Stu Macher's house, where the all of it goes down in the final act. Then you flip it over. This is only one LP. It's not a double, so there's no gatefold. You get your track listings, and notice side 1 is the original Scream. Side 2 is Scream 2. Of course, you get all your soundtrack credits there. And you get your pictures from the film. Sorry about the glare. And then down here at the very bottom, you have the movie credits. The LP itself is white. I don't know if you can see it. It isn't solid white. It does have some textural swirls in it that are kind of a dark color. It gives it a kind of a off-white or a dirty white look. Looks pretty neat. The center label has, of course, Drew Barrymore's Casey Becker from the beginning, and you notice it's hanging. You got phones hanging down out of entrails there. The center sticker on side 2 is the middle of an old rotary phone. It's not the dial part. I guess I need to be a little clear with what I say. It's from like an old rotary phone. It's not the part where you dial with your finger. It's from the receiver part of it where you actually talk into, or that's my interpretation of what I'm looking at anyway. Scream is one of those film scores that if you're a horror fan or you've seen the movie, odds are you recognize it when you hear it. It isn't necessarily one that pops into mind in terms of classic horror scores. I mean, it's not the Halloween theme. It's not the Friday the 13th. It's got its own feel to it. There are times it's very 90s, but it definitely has its own feel to it. Tracks 1 and 3 on side 1 are perhaps the most iconic. Sydney's Lament and track 3, Trouble in Woodsboro. Sydney's Lament, that is, when I think of music from Scream, that's the track that I think of. And if you watched my Scream review, you would know that that's the part. I did in my spoiler section, I did like my favorite musical part of the film. That part of it. Sydney's Lament is it just, I like the way it sounds. It's very haunting. It very much fits the movie. A perfect example of Sydney's Lament in the movie is when Sydney is walking around at home after they'd gotten home from school, after they went back the day when they were questioning them all about Casey Becker's murder and stuff. Sydney's home by herself. Her dad at this point has supposedly left on a business trip, and and she's talking on the phone to Tatum, who's played by Rose McGowan, and while she's walking around on the deck and all that, they play that. It's just a haunting melody, and it works wonderfully well for this film. Funny thing about the track Trouble in Woodsboro, I remember it more for the trailer from Scream 3 than I do actually for being in Scream 1. It's definitely in Scream 1, and it definitely has a very 90s vibe to it. It's the first time and the most memorable time that it's in the movie is when they arrive at school that the morning after Drew Barrymore's character is killed, and like I say, it's got a very 90s vibe to it. But it's funny because that track is used in the Scream 3 trailer that I remember, where it talks about rules of a trilogy. Chapter 1 sets the rules, Chapter 2 bends the rules, and Chapter 3 forget the rules. It's that track. If you've seen that particular trailer, that's the track that this is. It does a good job of conveying, yes, that everything's in chaos. It's got a very 90s feel to it. One of the first things you notice about this album, other than the fact that the first Scream's music is on side 1 and the second Scream's music is on side 2, I mean, that's an obvious detractor, but if this were on a CD or you weren't aware when the album was flipped, you could still definitely tell the music between the first 2 films. Now, it's just because they have that just a different enough feel. I mean, the second one's obviously still from Scream. You still have elements of the Scream soundtrack in there, but it's just not as well. It just has a different feel to it, I guess, is the best way to put it. I was never as big of a fan of the music in Scream 2. I mean, yeah, and it's very much still Scream's music, but it's got a different feel to it. And it's got, see, how do I want to say this? It tries different things. I mean, yeah, it's kind of funny. Some of Dewey's moments kind of tried to have like a Western saloon showdown feel to them, because that's how Dewey's, was the deputy in the first film that survived, and he comes to try to help Sid and everything. But it definitely has a more 90s-ish rock feel to it than the first one did. And, I mean, it's okay. It works for the movie, but I preferred the soundtrack to the first Scream. Out of the tracks that are on side 2 of this album, there aren't any of them that are necessarily iconic to the point where I recognize them quite as quickly as I do Sidney's Lament or Trouble in Woodsboro. Yes, there are elements from those played in these songs, and some of them they're featured quite prominently, but they're a little modern. I don't want to say modernized. The movie was made like a year later. They're jazzed up a little bit. The simplicity of them in the first Scream, or on side 1, if you will, is part of what made them work and made them so iconic. The soundtrack to the first Scream, it is very much iconic. It's probably the most recognizable 90s soundtrack in terms of horror. Interestingly enough, I don't know how familiar a lot of you guys are with like the music from Halloween H2O and What Happened with John Ottman's score, but there were parts of the soundtrack from Scream that are recycled. Of course, it's Dimension and Miramax and all that same company that are recycled for Halloween H2O, and those tracks, especially if you go back and watch the films back to back, you notice it pretty quickly that there are certain aspects. I'm not talking about the iconic moments like Sidney's Lament or the Trouble in Woodsboro. I'm more parts, elements of the chase music and stuff when, like during the third act of the first film. But, which is fine. It served Halloween H2O well as well. I just find it funny that they used a movie soundtrack that references and holds the original in such high regard to for the Jamie Lee Curtis's Laurie Strode and Michael Myers' grand return to the big screen. I just found that kind of interesting. But like I said, soundtrack for the first Scream is excellent. It's definitely easily one of the best, if not the best, horror score of the 90s. The soundtrack to the second one, okay. I'm just not as big of a fan of it as I was the first one. As far as this album goes, I picked it up at Barnes & Noble a while back, and I've listened to it a few times. It's a very solid pressing. I like the variant art, the album, it's the white with the kind of a dirty chalk look to it. But I like it, and it's a staple, especially around in October, or September, October, when we get into the fall Halloween season. And the pressing, and everything's good. I'm going to give the album for Scream, the score, I'm going to give an 8.5 out of 10. The score for Scream 2, I'm going to give a 6.5 out of 10. Say it's okay. It's just not nearly as good as the score from the first one. And as far as the album itself, I'm going to give it a solid A-. I'd like to see an actual LP release of the full score for Scream 1, 2, and 3, and now 4, I guess, actually. But the first one's the one I really want. I would love to have on wax a release of just the music from Scream, and not necessarily the music that's in it, that's what they call source music, which is music that's available elsewhere, that's popular artists, just Marco Beltrami's score. But I hope you all enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a like, and please consider subscribing to this channel. I try to have new content daily. Doesn't always work that way, but that's my goal. Thank you so much for watching this. That's all I've got for today. Follow me on Facebook or Twitter. Just search for Bob the Film Guy. I try to keep that fairly well updated. And for now, stay safe, everyone. This is Bob, signing off.